Well, I've procrastinated on this status update for 3 months, so this will have to cover the whole summer. Fortunately, nothing interesting happened. Well, for the most part. The time-lapse cameras have all malfunctioned, and I have some theories on that, and there's some interesting growth patterns in the front yard terrariums. And one of the terrariums in the backyard is surviving the summer heat even though I didn't expect it to, and the first version of that terrarium did die even though it was in the shade, and this one's in direct sun. And the main terrarium is doing a thing also, and anyway, I'll get to all that. These front yard terrariums have been a roller coaster as far as terrariums go. First, almost everything died despite the changes I'd made almost immediately. But then one tiny piece of this creeping fig just barely managed to eke out a living in the shaded portion of the terrarium, and now there's several of these little plants sprouting up as well, and in the sunny part, no less. I think this is a small weed known as spotted surge. They're pretty hardy, surviving in the hottest and driest parts of my yard, so it's not a complete survive that they can make it here. The website I used to ID the plant, greenbeelawn.com/common-texas-weeds, says that they primarily grow in poor soils, which I guess makes sense. But they rarely sprout in any of the other terrariums, so it's still a mystery to me why they showed up here, and even then, only several months after this terrarium was planted. The other two front yard terrariums are still dead, despite my efforts to rejuvenate number 00201. This backyard terrarium, number 00305, was refreshed at the same time as the front yard terrariums. It's sort of, kind of the same story, except that it doesn't have the planted creeping fig in it. Instead, it has this tiny little shrub. Based on the leaf shape, I think it's either creeping Charlie or henbit, but it could be any number of other plants growing in my backyard, most of which get much bigger than this terrarium, but the little one in here has been coping with the limited space for 5 months, and it seems to be managing. I think this one is surviving mainly because of all this crud I've piled up around it, which provides a little bit of shade, and this little old bean dip can that I've hung off the top, which provides even more shade, especially at the top where, the sun is hitting it. Those things are giving it just enough that it doesn't completely bake, but it seems to be a close running thing. I've definitely seen parts of this plant turn brown and die after I cut the backyard shade tree down, and it spent a day or two without so many cans and jars around it. So it seems to be very close to overheating and just barely managing. The old main Carboy terrarium is still around here too, but it's still dead. I haven't gotten around to doing anything to it. You can see a little bit of water on the inside of the glass though, so apparently it hadn't completely dried out before the winter storm killed it. If the front yard terrariums were a roller coaster, this backyard Carboy terrarium has been more like one of those rides that lifts you up to the very top of a big tower and then suddenly drops you. It's not dead, but it spent the whole spring growing a thicket of viney chickweed plants, and then they all died out the first time it took a direct hit from the summer sun. The lily turf grass survived, and it's still alive, but it isn't growing or doing much of anything at all. My guess is that either some essential nutrient is tied up in all the dead chickweed, or it's too hot for the grass to grow. I had a similar situation with this potted pepper plant. It performed poorly in its prior place, but properly perked up post-repositioning to my porch. That was because it got full sun and heat where I had it before, but it is mostly in indirect sun on the porch. Evidently, it coped with the sun and heat by just not growing, and the same is presumably true for the lily turf grass in this terrarium. The only other interesting thing going on in here is that there's another one of these little spotted surge plants, and it does seem to be growing. At least it's pretty tall, so there's that. The last, but maybe most interesting thing that's happened here is that the time-lapse cameras have repeatedly broken. At first I thought the batteries had simply run out, but removing and replacing them failed to fix the issue for more than a fortnight. There's no way the batteries burned out so quickly on their own. My first thought was that water had gotten into the camera interior and shorted things out, since it had rained a lot around the time they first ran dead. But there's been almost no rain at all for the last month, and they died again. Plus the cameras are waterproof and there's not really any water inside the enclosure, so I don't really think that's it. My second theory is that they overheated, and that may be the truth for at least one of these cameras. The last couple of pictures from this one all show temperatures in the range of 130 degrees Fahrenheit, which does seem like it could cause an alkaline battery to leak and die. And the batteries are all leaky and corroded when they take them out of the cameras. But the second camera is usually in less direct sun and doesn't get as hot, and it's also been dying. The last couple of pictures from this one all show a bunch of snapshots of the grass taken a few seconds apart. I think what's happening there could be that the grass grows up in front of the camera, triggers the motion sensor, and then causes the camera to run through all of its battery in a day or two, taking a ton of pictures and maybe running the infrared lamps the whole time. But it's not that compelling a theory because the actual total number of pictures on the camera is ultimately less than what it would be when the camera is functioning normally. Really the only reason this might be the cause is because of the infrared lamps. Anyway, long story short is my time-lapse cameras are running amok, and I don't know why, and therefore can't definitively fix the problem. But I do think it's related to the summer heat, because it only really became a problem around June. So I'm probably just not going to bother with the cameras until things start to cool off again in September. Given that that's only about a month from now, and it took me 3 months to put together this status update, that might not be noticeable to the 1 to 4 people who watch maybe half of each of these videos. But if you're someone from the future who wants to know why the time lapses only cover a couple of disconnected 1 or 2 week periods each, this is why. Anyway, that's all that happened this summer.